charged now. Fully charged. Fully charged. Anybody not have those two handouts? If you don't have, we can run you off one or two right quick.
I did not hear what you said.
We wanted to look at two handouts, Carla. One of them just says on it, we handed out earlier in the class, some general notes, one page, and then there was one that said some historical anchors for the book of Jeremiah. Huh? Historical anchors for the book of Jeremiah. It says, what are we doing back there? I don't know. Okay. All right. You don't have the anchors? Okay. I'll get Brother Reggie Carter to go in there and make you a copy right quick. Make Carla a copy of that, please, Reggie. Since you have so much not in your hands right now. And we'll be looking at chapter 9 in the book of Esther. Chapter 9 and chapter 10 only has 3 verses in it. And that. And what we plan on doing tonight, we're going to finish our course study in the book of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther tonight. Because next Monday, I'd had an appointment made a long time ago with one of those good doctor friends of mine over in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I need to be there. So we won't meet. We'll finish this class tonight. We're going to look at a couple of things on the introductory part of it. We're going to look at chapter 9, 10. And I'm hoping we'll have enough time left. I'm going to let you take your final test before you leave. Okay? I think we can do it. So, and we're going to remember in our prayers Jeannie Granger. Jeannie is the daughter of Madeline McNabb, and she's in the hospital over at Memorial having some issues. So let's bow our heads, if you would, please. Holy Father, thank you for the day and the blessings from your hand. Thank you for allowing us to come together to study your word. We pray that you would give us wisdom in so doing, that we might always give our life to be in harmony with your will. Look down upon us in your kindness and mercy and bless us and use us in your service. We're mindful especially tonight of Sister Jeannie Granger, that you would be with her and she might be able to regain her strength and be back to activities in life in a good way again. Your will be done in our life, and all that we do and say is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Book of Esther is a great book. It's not a difficult book as far as organizational structure or content is concerned. And so if you kind of go back and think about it in your mind, back in chapter 1, we have the introduction to the book. And there was a king there by the name of Ahasuerus. He had another name, by the way, Xerxes I. You might want to remember that, Xerxes I, Ahasuerus. And his reign was from about 465 to 424. And there, so those are good things to remember. And he was touting his great wealth by throwing, I call it a party, a feast for all the princes in the various 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. He was a Persian king. And he had asked his wife Vashti to present herself before the group. And it would seem to be, by implication, to do so in a rather immodest way, and Vashti refused, and therefore she was deposed as king, or pardon me, as queen. And so in chapter 2, we have Esther being brought on the scene by a process, and she becomes the queen. Chapter 3, we're introduced to a fellow really that hated Esther's first cousin, Mordecai. And Mordecai, in the latter part of chapter 2, had learned of a plot to assassinate the king. And he told that plot to Esther, and she in turn related that to King Ahasuerus. And notation was made of that in the historical records. There was a fellow by the name of Haman, who the king had promoted to the very highest position below himself. He was over all the princes there. But he hated Mordecai, the Jew. Why? Wouldn't bow down to him. He wouldn't give this man, who had obviously a false ego about him, down as such. And so he proceeded, Haman did, he proceeded to get a decree from the king that on a certain time that all the Jews in all the provinces would be exterminated. How did they determine what date that extermination would take place? They cast lots. And another word for casting lots is the word what? Purr. Not like the cat purrs, but it's just P-U-R, okay? And so purr. And so he does that. And so Mordecai instructs Esther to go in and make her plea to the king, and she reminds Mordecai says, you know, if anybody goes into the king and he doesn't hold out his scepter to them, what's the result of that? That's death. And so Mordecai says, well, you know, you've come to the king for a time like this. And so she went with great bravery, prepared herself in her greatest royal robe, and presented herself out in the court of the king, and he saw her and he invited her in. She went in and he held out his golden scepter to her and what have you. And so Esther then is going to make a request of the king, but in order for her to make that request of the king, she didn't just come right out on the spot there and say, this is what I want. So she had a way of going about that, which was a great way of wisdom on her part as such. She prepared a feast for the king and who else? Haman. Wanted them two to come to the feast that she prepared that day. And then so she prepared, they did. When they got there, the king asked her again what was her petition. She says, I want you to come back tomorrow. Says, I'm going to prepare a feast. I want you and Haman to come, chapter 6, what have you. And of course, Haman, how did Haman feel about that? He said, boy, I mean to tell you. In fact, he bragged to his wife. What's her name? What's her name? What is that wife's name of Haman? Wow. Was it XY or may have been Zeresh, right? Zeresh. Remember Zeresh? And because Zeresh is the one who recommended that Mordecai be taken care of. By the way, how did Zeresh recommend that Haman take care of Mordecai? Hang him. Oh, hang him high. 75 cubits or feet. That's a high, 75 feet. That's a high gallows, any way you look at it. Huh? That's a lot of steps. That's a lot of steps. So anyway. So, things take place. Of course, Haman and the king go into Esther's banquet. And Esther prepared the banquet, and the king asked Esther what was her petition, what was her request, and he says, I'll grant it up unto what extent? Half of the kingdom. Did she tell him? She told him. King says, who and where? Who is it and where is it? And Esther does what? This wicked Haman. I can just see Haman right then kind of going down. I mean to tell you. King goes outside into his garden before he does anything else. Probably a good thing to do, to give some thought to the matter. Come back into the room, and where does he find Haman?
Crawling on his wife.
Crawling on his wife's bed over there, making plea for his wife, but the king thought something else was in process there. And so Haman ended up being hanged. Well, the decree had been made for the Jews to be exterminated, and when a Persian makes a decree like that and sealed with the king's seal and ring, how can you change that decree? Can't do it. So what did the king do now for Mordecai and for Esther? Yeah, he said, you go write your own letter. Whatever you say, you can seal that with my king, and you have my full authority, which Mordecai and Esther did. What was the date that they chose, by the way, that these Jews would be exterminated? 12th day there, 13th. I read it when they read it. The day was the first day of it. There in the process, and so they determined that. So the decree, the day came. Chapter 8, the day came, and in chapter 9 we have what takes place on that day. Now then, before we get in that, let's look at this page. It says some general notes. This is when we talk about the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, We're talking about that period of return and restoration, which was from the degree of Cyrus to the close of the Old Testament canon, or Old Testament books. And so that's what those three books are about. That's a good thing to remember. When you talk about the ministry or the work in the days of Ezra, to be placed in the ministry of a particular Persian king by the name of Artaxerxes I, 465 to 424. And I may have, did I give you Ahasuerus' date a while ago? If I did, I may have given it wrong. It's 486 down to about 465. And so Ezra goes up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, and that would date his going up to Jerusalem around 458 BC. And there was a number who went back out of Egyptian captivity under the leadership of a man by the name of who? Not Ezra this time. The first group that went up was by Zerubbabel, wasn't it? Then later there was a second group went up with Ezra, chapter 7. There's quite a number of years between chapter 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra, if you will, in the process. Total going up on your notes there, M49, 497. That's such. Now when you come to Nehemiah, his book, he goes up in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, same king that Ezra lived under. And so if you go back to 465, 464, that puts Nehemiah going up around 445, 444 BC, doesn't it? So we can get his date that way also. And so he goes up, and he goes up. Nehemiah had one particular thing in which he was concerned about, and that was to do what? Build the wall. And so he came up, and he did that and completed that. How many days did it take to build that wall? 52 days. 52 days. And of course, the great chapter 3 in that book is, and next unto him, the people had a what to work? They had a mind to work, didn't they, in the process? And so the 20th year. There's a note by a fellow by the name of Smith. I've forgotten his first name. It comes out of a series of commentaries written by the College Press group. So that's some pretty good Old Testament background in them, if you will. Long gap between the two parts of Ezra's ministry. First part deals with events from 536 to 516, and that's Zerubbabel. Part 2 deals with events about 70 years later, about 458. Now then, Ester, 479. 486 was the date of Xerxes I, or Ahasuerus, their reigns. And it was in the third year, he made this great feast in Shushan, which was the name of the capital of the country at that time. And that's when that 180 days feast went in the process. And look at number 3 under that event there. We don't have this in our text as such. During the years following, Xerxes made a campaign against Greece. Stopped at Thermopylae, defeated at the naval battle at Salamis, and nearly annihilated at Plataea, 479 BC. So he comes back to Persia in his 7th year, and he sought consolation, it says, with his harem, according to Herodotus as such. Of course, 479 is the year in which the queen was chosen to replace Vashti, the 7th year of his reign. And so this is when Esther was selected. Now just very quickly on this handout here on historical anchors for the book of Jeremiah. All I want you to do to look at that is just kind of have it in your mind and there, because you have one section there on one side of that chart, important dates, and going all the way back to the days of the divided kingdom. But if you come down to about 536, about a little more than halfway down, you have the return of the Jews under Zerubbabel, the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, the return of the Jews under Ezra. Nehemiah led the Jews in rebuilding the wall, and then Nehemiah's second return to Jerusalem. So those are just good dates to have in our minds as such. And then the 5 kings, last 5 kings of Judah. And this goes back basically to Josiah, which dates back to 640 BC, and since the book of Ezra picks up around 536, so it's quite a bit of time before that in the process. And so you have Josiah, great king, Jehoahaz, a son, 3 months, not so great. Jehoiakim, also a brother to Jehoahaz, 11 years, not so great. Jehoiachin, son of Josiah, not so great. And then, of course, Zedekiah as such. And then Gedaliah was a governor. And so the historical background is given at the bottom of that chart. And then you have a general outline of the book of Jeremiah, which is good to have also, by the way. Let's turn to the book of Esther. Chapter 8, we have the action which is taken to offset the decree against the Jews. Mordecai, what happens to him in verses 1 and 2 in chapter 8? Came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her, and the king did what? Verse 2. Honored him, didn't he? Took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman. Haman didn't need it, you know, being hanged and everything. Gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And so that which was over Mordecai now is under Mordecai's rule and whims and perfect. And so she petitions the king to reverse the death decree. The king can't do that, of course, but he does authorize to write what would become Haman's wicked decree, to overcome Haman's wicked decree. And then the Jews, latter part, verses 9 through 14 in chapter 8, Jews are given liberty to defend themselves. That made the Jews happy or sad? Made him happy, didn't it? And so they did. Chapter 9 there. They're victorious over their enemies. Their first several verses, that's it. The month is Adar, 13th day of the same month. That's the one that Haman had selected by by casting lots in the process there. That's the day the Jews adopted the power over them, but rather than they having power over the Jews, it turned right around, didn't it? The Jews had power over them, and so just the contrary to it will. They gathered themselves together, and so throughout the kingdom, and there. What about verse 3? Talks about the rulers of the provinces, the lieutenants, the deputies, the officers of the king. Who'd they help? Jews, didn't it? They helped the Jews. Wonder why they did that. Here are the officials, the officers and everything of the king Ahasuerus' government, and they're out here helping the Jews. Do what, Jim? Feared Mordecai, didn't it? So gives you some idea about Mordecai. And verse 4 tells us, I guess, why they feared him, because it said Mordecai was great in the king's house. Fame went throughout all the provinces. And it says, and this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. So the Jews smote their enemies. Verse 6, Shushan, there was destroyed 500. Verses 7, 8, and 9 gives the names of 10 men. And who are they? Sons of Haman. Only time their names are mentioned, and the name has to do with the fact of their rebellion. So number 11, verse 11, on that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan was brought before the king. And so pick up about verse 12 thereabout, talks about on this 14th day of Adar, which is the next day of the destruction, more took place. And Esther made a requirement. Let's go back and see what he says about that. Verse 13, she says, well, verse 12, the king asked, what else could be done? And so verse 13, Esther said, pleases the king, that's her disposition always, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according to today. And the king said what? Go for it. And it commanded to be done, if you will. And so they were gathered in Shushan that day. And they slew that day a number of people here. And how many according to verse 15? On the 14th day they slew how many men at Shushan? 300, it said, didn't it? And so they gathered themselves together. So verse 17 talks about the 13th day of the month Adar, 14th day of the same. They rested. It said they made it a day of what? Feasting and gladness. Kind of reminds you, I guess, a little bit of our 4th of July type celebrations, I would say. And so the Jews gathered together there, and they rested, made a day of feasting. And so verse 19 says, therefore the Jews in the villages that dwelt in the walled towns in the 14th day of the month Adar, as such. And so verse 20 goes down where Mordecai is going to write a letter. And this letter is simply going to confirm the 14th and the 15th days of Adar to be observed how often? Yearly, weren't they? And so, look at verse 24 says, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. And so on down 26 says, wherefore they call these days what? Purim, after the name of Pur, for all the words. And so the Jews ordained and took upon themselves that way, and they kept these 2 days according to the right. And they still do so in our day and age. I think we mentioned last week, this last Saturday and Sunday were the days of Purim in the Jewish communities. And be kept throughout their generations, verse 28 there. And so verse 29 talks about Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. So the days of Purim are days which are set into place by Mordecai and Esther back in their days upon this earth. And verse 32, the desire of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Chapter 10 simply talks about the greatness of Mordecai. Kind of interesting to me, at least. Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land, that means a tax, and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai. For unto the king advanced him. And he says, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? And verse 3 says, Mordecai the Jew was next unto whom? King Ahasuerus. Great among the Jews, accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people and speaking peace in his seed. Kind of interesting that Mordecai be promoted to such a high position in the land, and yet he was still looked up to and respected by his fellow Jews. Can you think of a couple of other fellows in the history of Israel who advanced to that great position also in the lands in which they lived? Who? Who's that, Jeff? Joseph and Daniel, didn't it? Joseph was promoted to second to Pharaoh, came out of captivity, being in bondage, brought out of prison, and interpreted the king's dream, and he was promoted, and he was given charge, really, of helping the people of the land survive because he built the great storehouses in Israel. And then, of course, Daniel was one who came out of captivity. He was one who was taken into captivity. And while he was there, he presented himself before the king in a light in which none of the other so-called sorcerers or wise men could do. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar promoted him. And then later on, Belshazzar also promoted him to a very high and great position. So he was to be second. I think about chapter 6 of the book of Daniel, verse 3 there. Okay. And so here's another man, Mordecai. So when you put Mordecai in the company of Joseph and Daniel, that's pretty good company, isn't it, in the process? So there you go. Question, comment, dear brethren? Say that again, Carmen. Executed? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I am going to let you take a few minutes and answer these questions on this final exam. And Brother Reggie, I'm going to let you pass it out. We got 24 or 5 minutes. I don't think it'll take you more than 18 and a half and, to do that. So, okay. That's good, okay. And so go ahead and put your name on it and just do it. You're supposed to be able to do this without your Bible and without your notes. So let's see how you do, okay? Not too, it's kind of not too difficult. You see anything you have a question about, just let me know. We'll try to address it. Thank you, kind sir. Appreciate that. We're going to grade these in class, John, if you want to just hold on to them, brother. Everybody about through? Need a little extra time, raise your paw. Everybody's through, I guess. Okay. All right. Number one can be worded in various ways there. How'd you word yours, Reggie? Number one there. Books of. Okay. Return is a key word in those things. Of course, back to what'd you put on yours, Carl?
I said the Jews returned to Jerusalem from Babylonian captivity.
That's great. So if you have in your answer the idea of the Jews returning back out of captivity in there and restoring the temple and the wall and the things, anything in that area, that'd be good. Okay, all righty. Number A there, Miss Carla, 606 BC. You got yeah.
I put first carrying away of the Jews to Babylon.
Great. So that's the taking of the southern kingdom into Babylonian captivity. Okay, Babylonian captivity. 536, Brother Jim, you got that one? Okay, well, John? Yeah, the Cyrus's decree. Jews can return back to Palestine. So if you got either one of those ideas in there, it'd be okay. Number C, there, Miss Carmen, you got that one? 458 BC. What happened? Can't hear you. Yeah. All right, what you got back there, Melissa? Okay, 458 BC, under Ezra, okay. Good idea. So if you got the idea of Ezra going up and restoring the worship or the second return, all that's okay. What about 440 BC? Anybody? Raise your hand. Okay, Carl. Return to Nehemiah, build the wall. 432. Mark, you got that one? 432. That. Okay, I got you, no problem. We didn't mention that tonight in reviewing there, so that was a second going up of who? Nehemiah, wasn't it? That was Nehemiah's second return. He went up one time at the king's permission. The king said, "How long are you going to be gone?" He told him. He went back when he's supposed to go back and turned around. The king let him go back up again. So there you go. 479, and great date there. What's happening? 479. Ester. Ester becomes queen. 479 BC. Match the following. Number 1, Shushan. D, capital. Number 2, Vashti. F, deposed. Number 3, Ahasuerus. H, yeah. A little tricky, but you got it. H, number Xerxes the first. Number 4, Esther. Yeah, I like that other name, don't you? Hadassah. Hadassah. And talking about good wives, we wouldn't want to talk about Zeresh, though, would we? Who is Zeresh? She gave some bad advice, didn't she? What was Zeresh's advice to her husband, Haman? Yeah, hang him. Get him out of the way, hang him. And, number 6 talks a fellow by the name of Bigthan. Yeah, would-be assassin back in the latter part of chapter 2. And then, of course, number 8 is Haman. Hanged. He was hanged. Okay. That would be number C. All right. True or false? This. A decree was written by Haman which condemned all Jews in all the provinces to death. That's true. He got permission. Number 2, the law of the Medes and Persians was irrevocable. That's true also. Number 3, Esther could enter into the presence of the king at any time without danger. That's false. No one could. Number 4 is the king took Haman's advice on how to honor Mordecai. That's true. You reckon he wished he hadn't given that advice? I bet he did.
What advice would he have given if he knew it was honoring somebody else?
I don't.
Like, do you think it would have been nearly as extravagant?
I don't think it'd be quite that extensive. I really don't. If he thought he was honoring somebody else. If the king said, Haman, we want to honor Mordecai, I don't know what he would have done then. Oh, I don't know. Number 5, the king's servants exposed Haman as a wicked man. False. Who did expose him? Esther did, didn't she? Number 6, the king repealed the death sentence passed upon the Jews. False. Couldn't do it. Number 7, Mordecai was promoted to second position to the king of Persia. True. And number 8, the Feast of Purim is to be observed in sackcloth and ashes. It's a happy time. All right, if you're taking it for credit, here's how you're going to grade your score, okay? All the answers from 1, 2, 3, and 4, there's some 23 of them. They're worth 2 points each. Number 5 says, I've read the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Ester, and that will be worth 26 points. If you answer it yes, if you haven't read all those, then you need to get up a percentage of it, and then give me what percent of 26 that is. Easiest thing to do is just go ahead and read the books, you know what I mean? Yeah. And number 6 there is worth 28 points. I have completed what percent of the study questions on Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. If you have 100% complete, then that would be worth 28. If you have less than 100%, then you would take whatever percentage that you have and take that percent of 28, and that's what your total number would be worth. Excuse me. All right, let's see if we can get our credit marks down here. Carl, you get 100? 90? Okay. Okie dokie, let's see here. Johnny, what you got? 94. Good going, man. And Reggie, you're on credit, aren't you? Okay. One, two, three. Joshua Jackson is not here tonight, so he's a credit student. Anybody else taking the class for credit that I don't have notation of here? Okay. All right, my friend. Been my joy and privilege being a part of your class for these 12 weeks. I started to say 13, but it's 12 weeks there. And look forward to seeing you again, Lord willing, someday not too distant future. So if you got 80, okay. All right, man. Just hang on to your papers now. Yeah, I don't need them. So, okay, all right. We're going to close with a prayer, and we're going to ask Brother Jim, you mind wording that prayer for us?
Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day and for the many blessings that you've given us. We're thankful that we have had the opportunity to take this classroom and help us with the studies and with the daily life. We ask that you please bless each of us, that you bless the school and all the people that are a part of it.
Amen. Thank you, sir. right, my friend. I guess I just mail one of these to Joshua to see if he's going to take it for credit.
Can I have a copy of one of those?
Yes, sir.
I can email him one. If you want me to do that,
That'd be fine.
I'll just scan one and email it to him. Josh Jackson?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's down as